Hey everyone, and welcome back to the second episode of Pauper News. Today we are talking about the Super Qualifier held on the 28th January and the post-ban metagame. I think we can also talk about the first spoilers of Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, and Ragavan is not banned at the Legacy. I think it's important, or at least interesting, to talk about these and why. In Legacy, a lot of people talk about why they should ban these instead of eventually any other cards. Okay, the metagame about the 28th Super Qualifier is kind of expected, because in this kind of event, usually there are a lot of mtgo grinders and non-Pauper players. In this kind of qualifiers and Pro Tour qualifiers, Super Qualifiers, you can usually join with mtgo qualifier points. Those are points that you get by just playing in competitive events like the leagues and also the challenges. You can't use those points in any other events, and after some times they expire, usually when the season ends. So it's always better to spend them when you have the change. For that reason, this event gather a lot of different players, non-Pauper players, grinders, and people that just want to spend those qualifier points in one of their favorite formats. For that reason, we can see a lot of competitive decks like Fairies and Burst Bully, and basically the most played decks are always the most powerful ones. In this case, we were able to see that Affinity was the second most played deck, with Dimmer Fairies as the most played deck. Actually, I think of Fairies, both Dimir and Izzet, as one single macro archetype, because they have the same blue shell. They have also a different colors combination, because Dimir has better cards to interact with certain decks, and Izzet has obviously better cards to interact with other archetypes. So, for example, Pyroblast to deal with the mirror match or any kind of mood drifter deck, or in case of Dimir, Snuff Out to deal with swarm decks, creature decks, etc. Fairies is obviously the best deck, but that doesn't mean that having Fairies as the best deck in the format is the bad thing. Fairies is an interactive deck. It certainly have a form of non-interactive gameplay, because you can often die from Fairies by a nearly Ninja of DD power or a turn for Monarch. It's kind of fine to have Fairies if you also have an anti-Fairies deck in the format, and that was for a lot of time Boros Monarch. I'm not talking about the Boros token decks. That deck is usually referred as Boros Bully, or Boros tokens. But nowadays, thanks to MTG Goldfish leveling the decks in not often in the right way, Boros Bully is more referred to Boros Monarch as the old Boros Monarch that now is probably called Mardu Metalcraft or Mardu Monarch. By the way, the Boros Metalcraft deck with Ballast Sentinel is not really played right now, so only Boros Bully remain in the format as anti-fairies Boros Monarch deck. That's also interesting because a couple of deck lists of Boros Bully without Palace Sentinel has showed up. And so the metagame has evolved in an unexpected way. Affinity is still one of the two best decks. Probably a lot of people thought that Affinity will die without ETOG because in the previous metagame with ETOG Legal and Sojourner's Companion banned, ETOG was basically the only win condition of Affinity, but is basically impossible to destroy. To kill, to put aside this deck from the metagame when it plays 4 copies of Toolcast, Deadly Dispute, and Ichor Wellspring. Also, they have Blood Fountain, so basically they can play not so many creatures. They just play their best creatures for Affinity. Then they have a lot of card advantage, and they can grind out any kind of mid-range control shell, which is bizarre because a lot of people complain about Monarch. Also, I'm also complaining about Monarch, but Affinity can draw more cards than a Monarch deck because they draw spells. They are so much cheap that they can draw 6 or more cards for a single turn. That seems kind of unhealthy, but I think that we are not really having any deck that are able to have a decent win condition against Fairies and Affinity in the current metagame, at least. Because just remember that they banned ETOG the last week, so the metagame can still evolve, and this event was a particular one because it wasn't a challenge. It was an event where people tried to play the best deck in the format, or the deck able to beat the best deck in the format. So they either played Fairies or an anti-Fairies deck. And you can also see that the top 8 was 4 Dimir Fairies deck, 1 Boros Bully that can be considered both as an anti-Affinity deck and an anti-Fairy deck, and we also have Mono Black Devotion. Mono Black Devotion, or maybe Mono Black Monarch, because they played 4 copies of Turn the Black Rose. This list is actually good, but I think that most Mono Black Devotion lists are bad. And the deck doesn't really seem so great, actually. For example, Great Merchant of Asphodel is not really great. It's not really great because it forces you to play bad creatures like Cithering Rats and Phyrexian Rager. This deck obviously always have a problem that is not really having an early game. All the creatures cost 3 mana, excluding Combative Switches, and their best payoff is not very great because it's just a sort of Siege Rhino. But if you don't have any creatures on the battlefield because your opponent kill all your creatures, this Grey Merchant of Asphodel is just a 2/4 creature that costs 5 mana. But the good thing about Mono Black is obviously Thorn of Black Rose. Thorn of Black Rose with a lot of cards against Boros Bully and Fairies. Suffocating Fumes, mostly. So this deck is just a meta cool, and is built to win mostly against Burst Bully and Furies. You can also consider that Thorn of Black Rose is the best card against Affinity, at least in Game 1. Post side, you can bring in Unexpected Things, or Distress, or also Nihil Spellbomb. So basically, the player might choose a good deck, or at least choose some good meta calls. I think we can also take a look at the Affinity deck list that Top hated, because we talked that Affinity is still one of the 2 best decks in the format, but we still don't have the best Affinity deck post E2 ban. Basically, those Affinity lists are the old Affinity list with random cards instead of E2. In this case, this list plays Glazfiend. Glazfiend is not really a great card, so they're not playing Disciple of the Vault. Probably that's a right choice, because Disciple of the Vault became good only thanks to E2 and Makeshift Munitions. Glazfiend is probably one of the best aggressive creatures you can play in an Affinity deck, because you can play it on turn 2, and also thanks to cards like Blood Fountain and Deadly Dispute, you can attack for 10 damage on turn 3. As I said in the last episode, I talked about an Affinity list that I tried on League, and often I was able to attack with Glazfiend for 10 damage on turn 2. That's surprising, because you're not expecting that Glazfiend is playable, but Glazfiend is actually kind of good. It's not really consistent. You can kill it with a lot of cards, and you also need to play something before the combat to pump it and attack with at least 2-3 creatures. But since it gets a bonus from any kind of artifact it enters off the battlefield, even the lands can interact well with Glazfiend. I think that maybe in the near future we will see a more aggressive Affinity shell with Glazfiend, not relying on rich cards like Galvanic Blast or Makeshift Munitions maybe, but right now if you want to play Affinity you need the red mana, because you need to play Galvanic Blast and Makeshift Munitions. I tried Affinity with Galvanic Blast and with Munitions, it wasn't great. Galvanic Blast is both rich but also an answer to problematic cards, and in a Pauper there are a lot of problematic creatures that you want to kill also in Game 1. For example, in Elves you want to kill Wallwisher, in Furries you want to kill Spellstutter Sprite or Ninja, you also want to kill Thorn of the Black Rose, just for example. So it's always better to have Galvanic Blast in Affinity. Another deck list we should take a look is the Charm of Fear Burst list without Palace Sentinel. I don't really like not playing Palace Sentinel Bully, and I also don't really like not playing Seeker of the Way. I think of Seeker of the Way of one of the 2 best creatures in a Bully. Probably Squadron Hawk is the best one, because you play Physical Assaulting, and Squadron Hawk helps you getting some extra cards, because this deck doesn't generate card advantage. It's just loot a lot, you can discard extra lands, but it doesn't have card advantage beside Palace Sentinel. Squadron Hawk is great, obviously, even in a deck without Brainstorm. Brainstorm Oak was something played in block in Extended with in Coblade, right? Another cool deck that Top hated is actually Goblin Combo or Mogwart. Sometimes Mogwarts pop up as combo deck. I think the deck is good, but I'm not sure why people doesn't play it. Seems kind of difficult to play it, but it can kill you on turn 3, on turn 4, and can also play a lot of card advantage in form of Deadly Dispute plus Eco Wellspring. Eco Wellspring is not weird here, because you can also play Makeshift Munitions. Munitions is both an enabler for Eco Wellspring, but it can also be a win condition, because if you generate infinite mana with Skill Prospector and Putrid Goblin, you can sacrifice an infinite amount of time Putrid Goblin with munitions, just as Flame Invoker can be. I think that the best Goblin combo list is probably the Grixis one, splashing blue, basically only for 2 cast, and sideboard cards obviously. You can play Blue Elemental Blast in your sideboard, and Blue Elemental Blast seems better than Duress to deal with decks like Affinity to kill Karkan Shaman or Makeshift Munitions, and also in the mirror match obviously. Maybe we will see some more Goblin combo decks in the next week, thanks to this result, but I'm still sure that this deck is underplayed on Magic Online. Maybe a reason for that is also that you need to loop your Putrid Goblin with Skill Prospector for the combo, and you need to generate a great amount of mana just to kill your opponent, so it's not one of the fastest deck. Probably it's not really well positioned against Burn also, because you can Burn just play only removal spells and can also kill you on turn 4. Maybe if Affinity doesn't show up a lot of time, maybe Goblin can replace it as a Metalcraft combo deck. But Affinity doesn't really require a combo to kill you, and this Goblin combo deck basically just play card advantage and the combo cards. Also, it's like a 1, 2, 4 cards combo deck, which seems kind of weird that a 4 cards combo deck can kill you on turn 3. We can also take another look at other affinity lists, because we talked about Disciple of the Vault, and some deck lists are still playing Disciple of the Vault, and they are just replacing Aether with Karkan Shaman or Karkan Grant. Karkan Grant is not very great actually. It costs 2 more mana compared to Karkan Shaman, and usually the Disciple of the Vault Karkan Shaman combo is just a late game combo for those matchups where you have already dealt enough damage to kill them with something like 10 artifact lands. I think that Karkan Shaman can be a good main deck option, because Affinity always had a negative matchup against Greenswarm decks, and especially this Affinity deck with Etug is kind of slow and bad against decks like Stompy or Wolves or Elves, so Karkan Shaman can help a lot. You can also be faster with the 1 mana Karkan Shaman instead of the 3 mana Goblin with a stick, for the simple reason that if they kill your Disciples or Karkan Shaman and then you want to crack Blood Fountain and the same turn you want to kill them, you just need 6 mana to play a Disciple of the Vault and a Karkan Shaman. Deck seems Affinity is still quite good, so I recommend you to play Affinity if you like this kind of deck. I think that the metagame basically is just a sort of affinity against fairies and bully against affinity and fairies. From my opinion, these three decks are the main pillars of the format, where affinity fairies have a good matchup against random decks. Boros Bully is an anti-affinity and anti-first deck, and then we have blue ephemerate control decks that are kind of good because they have ephemerate. Affinity is great because it has the best card advantage in the format. It's cheap. You just need 1 mana to draw 2 cards with Dispute or Tollcast. It also has cheap interaction. Fairies have cheap interaction in form of Counterspell, Snuff Out, Scred, Pyroblast, etc. And can draw a lot of cards thanks to Monarch. Boros Bully, Boros Token, Boros Monarch, whatever you want to call it, have 2 important aspects for the deck that are Monarch and a kind of traditional tempo style gameplay. It's obviously not a tempo deck. It's a mid-range deck mostly, but can play a sort of time walk plus turn 1 kill in form of prismatic strands, comboing with Battle Screech or Squadron Oak with Rally the Pheasant. And that's the great part about Boros Bully, that you can win against any kind of aggro deck because you have 4 copies of prismatic strands and you don't have you don't need to be interactive with your opponent to win the game. You can win with your evasive tokens. You can win especially with Rally the Pheasant, comboing with your creatures. If you have something like 5 creatures on the battlefield, a single Rally the Pheasant is like 25 damage, which is a lot. I think that affinity and fairies are kind of fair matched. Basically, the matchup against the matchup affinity versus fairies is something like 50%, but affinity is slightly favored. I think it was one of the worst cards against the fairies because fairies plays Hydroblast, and you don't really want to sacrifice your sources to die from a 1 mana counter or 1 mana removal. But cards like Blood Fountain and Makeshift Munitions, and obviously the card advantage, makes the matchup slightly favorable for affinity. Fairies can win with that kind of tempo gameplay, with an early game Ninja of Deity Powers or a Monarch or a Gurma Gangler. Probably is the only way that fairies can win against affinity. But affinity still have good chances to win against affinity because they have great answers in form of, for example, counter spells and removal spells like Snuff Out. They can also play graveyard aids like Relic of Progenitus or Heal Spell. So the matchup is played, I think. Then we have all the ephemerate decks that are probably not the greatest decks right now, but Ephemerate is a broken card and they have the blue interaction spells. They can splash another color for removals like Galvanic Blast or Pyroblast, or they can splash white, or no, they're not splashing white because they need white for Ephemerate. but they can play powerful white cards like Stonehold Dignitary to block any kind of random aggressive deck. For example, Stonehold Dignitary is great against Boros Bully because the Monarch in Boros Bully is not really a problem to any ephemerate deck, because Boros Bully is not drawing anything relevant for the matchup, just Pyroblast, or maybe a Relic of Progenitus if they play a Relic of Progenitus in their sideboard. But usually Bully is a buy for any ephemerate deck. I think that the Jeskai ephemerate deck is not really great compared to Azorius Familiar. All of them are control decks, but Jeskai probably is easier for non-control players because it's faster and plays more traditional control deck gameplay. It can also play Monarch in form of the 5/2 red 1 Crimson Fleet Commodore, I think. Monarch in an ephemerate deck, I'll play it only to counter. I'd play it only to counter the Fairies Monarch actually, because you don't really need Monarch in an ephemerate deck because you already have Mulldrifter and ephemerate. Basically, ephemerate works like Monarch because it draws one extra card per turn, but you can play more than one ephemerate per turn, and you also draw the best card in your graveyard. I wrote Ike Cost, Ike Impact Card Advantage or Ephemerate Lock because compared to the other decks, blue Ephemerate Control deck plays much higher cost cards, for example Mulldrifter or Archaeomancer. So basically their card advantage creatures cost always 4 or more mana. So you need 4 mana to play Drifter plus Ephemerate, or to play Archaeomancer to bring back a spell. And they're not faster than the other decks, especially since the soft Bane Tron. So now the best ephemerate deck are the non-Tron ones. Tron I think is still playable, but I think that is not good to play ephemerate in Tron now, unless you play Azorius Tron. If you play only white as a secondary color, you don't really need to play only Ghostly Flicker. Ephemerate is still great, so will still be great in Tron, but I'd prefer Ghostly Flicker over Ephemerate, especially since I need more green compared to white, because mostly for Pulse of Mraz, I think. Pulse of Mraz is just too great for Tron because you can bring back your lands. So blue Ephemerate seems like a sort of 4 great macro archetype in this metagame, where Affinity seems to be the best one, but you can counter Affinity with Boros Bully. The second best deck is Fairies because it's just too much good. Finally we have Boros Bully as a sort of choice when you want to predate over the 2 best decks. Blue Ephemerate seems great against random decks, but seems sort of bad against Fairies because you don't really play a lot of removals in an ephemerate deck, and that early game Monarch or Ninja of DD Powers is just is really troublesome. Without Atog, probably Affinity is a favorable matchup for the blue Ephemerate. Sometimes you lose, but Ephemerate has always been a troublesome card for Affinity. So they now banned the most troublesome card for Ephemerate when facing Affinity. So obviously the matchup improved. We talked about Tron, right? So I think it's good to show you a recent Tron list that got a 5-0 in the mtgo leaks. Basically all the Tron lists are trying to fit a couple of Signets, mostly Simic Signet because the deck is Simic. You can also try to play Izzet Tron with removal spells, but removal spells are not really great since you can face very aggressive decks. For example, Flame Slash, Lightning Bolt are really bad against Mono White Heroic, and probably are not enough against a deck like Boros Bully or Stompy. They also play Honored Heirloom, which is kind of fine, I think. It's cool to exile a card from your opponent's graveyard. You can also counter Ephemerate, but probably I'd prefer 4 or 5 Signets for the only reason that the Simic Signet costs only 2 mana. I also like playing 4 copies of Seagate Oracle because Seagate Oracle is just good. It's similar to Ugor of Bolas and can block Ninja of Deity Powers, can block any kind of creature. So hypothetically you can slow down your opponent's aggro. It's not... I don't like Wretched Grave. It seems kind of bad here. I mean, you don't have Expedition Map, you only have 2 copies of Crop Rotation and only 1 copy of Mystical Teachings. So you probably will not have often Teachings for Crop Rotation or turn 3 Tron. I mean, Wretched Grave is kind of good as Pauper card, but not in this deck. Especially since they printed more interaction in red against fairies. Well, maybe you don't want to splash for red to play Pyroblast or Scattershot or Fear Cannonade, but I think that we can play better answers to fairies compared or to Burst Bully compared to Wretched Grave. Probably I will go to a sort of Simic Turbo Fog Tron, relying more on cards like Serrated Arrows or Moment's Peace or Simic Signet. But anyway, I still think that Tron is still good because turn 3 7 mana is still good. Maybe we just need to find which color combination is better compared to the other one, for the simple reason that you want to play certain cards to play the usual fog Tron gameplay. Azera seems fine because Ephemerate is broken. You lose Pulse of Miraza and Crop Rotation, but you will be still able to play cards like Stormhound Dignitary, maybe Prismatic Strands, maybe Dawn Charm if you want an alternative to Moment's Peace. And I still hate Cascade Tron because Cascade Tron is just too much down. Finally, we will talk about Kamigawa Neon Dynasty Spoilers because they print similar card to Spring Leaf Drum. I do really like Moonsnare Prototype, and I also think that this blue Spring Leaf Drum is obviously bad. I mean, the good part about Spring Leaf Drum is fixing the mana, but you can play a sort of more aggressive affinity deck with more Carry Divinity, with more mana ramp, and a more aggressive approach. So basically a sort of Brute Squad with 8 copies of Spring Leaf Drum. the channel part is not really, probably doesn't really matter, but a little bit better than nothing. You can bounce your opponent blocker or your creature to save it, so it's fine if you just want to mana ramp. Anyway, an affinity deck can still play a lot of card advantage, so wasting your slots with Springleaf Ram and Musnir Prototype probably is not really bad. Talking about the other cards, I think that they still haven't showed anything relevant from Pauper. I think that it's great to have more enchantment creatures because they're kind of cool. The equipment creatures are also cool. Maybe we will see something relevant or good. Channel is just a great ability. I do really like it because you can just a model spell similar to Pyroblast. I mean, Pyroblast can kill or destroy, can destroy or counter, and a channel spell can be played as a creature or as a non-counterable spell because this is an ability. It's not an alternative cost. Really nice that we have new ninjas, but they still haven't showed any Pauper playable ninja. And it's also cool that we have finally common sagas. I don't think that these sagas that they showed already aren't playable because they have miserable first and second chapter, and the last counter doesn't really matter because they transform the saga in a vanilla creature. For example, you are basically paying for mana to play it 2 turns later a 2/4 flying creature. It's really bad. But it's cool to have common sagas. That's truly cool. Then they really showed anything relevant. The basic lands are awesome. The new samurai tribals are really bad because you are forced to attack with only one creature to do something. It's really bad. The enchantment creature dog is cool because it's a color shifted elvish visionary, so it's fine to have it. Probably Trouble Inspector will be still better because it costs only 1 mana to enter on the battlefield, and it can also block and survive other creatures like Ogre of Wallace. This one is just a 1/1 jump block and then die, so it's not really. It has miserable stats. And then they haven't shown any more commons yet. If we want to see something good in mythics or rare cards, Buzeiju is probably the most broken card they haven't shown yet because you can destroy a land, an artifact, or enchantment with an ability. So it's broken with red and 6 or life from all arm. And if you have a Ragavan on the battlefield, for example in Modern, this ability costs only 1 green mana. Luckily, it said legendary creature instead of legendary permanent, because if it said legendary permanent, you can play a lot of you can just play a lot of copy of Buzeiju, and we can have Buzeiju on the battlefield. You can channel another Buzeiju with only 1 green mana. That's a kind of broken in Modern, especially, or when you can play turn 2 random 6, for example. Imagine discounting your Buzeiju channel ability with your random 6. But we talked about Ragavan, so let's talk about Ragavan in Legacy. Even not Ragavan in Legacy. I think that was kind of expected. I mean, Legacy Ragavan was broken and I think that was a right choice to ban Ragavan. But a lot of people also think that they should ban Days in Legacy, and it doesn't really seem weird to me banning Days, because they already banned the card in Pauper. I think that this is obviously much better in Legacy compared to Pauper, because you can bounce your dual lands, and your dual lands doesn't require lives to enter the battlefield tapped, and they always enter the battlefield untapped. You can bounce your tropical island to protect your Ragavan, your turn 1 Ragavan, or your turn 2 dashed Ragavan. That's truly broken. So Ragavan was banned. Not surprised by that thing. Also in Legacy you can play the Pauper cantrips that are banned in Modern, and that obviously means that Ragavan was much broken in Legacy compared to Modern. So it's not a surprise. I'm not surprised at all by Ragavan being banned in Legacy. Well, this probably will be also a good ban, but they didn't touch it. The thing is that blue-red tempo decks in Legacy have always showed that one of the best archetypes in the format, and this deck basically gets a ban after each new expansion. They already banned Red Arcanist, Oko, and now Ragavan. So probably we will see new bans in the next few years. And people thought that banning the most powerful cards, the most powerful protected spell in form of Days would be also a good choice, because if Ragavan would be much worse if you need a Force of Will to protect it, or if you need to leave 1 blue mana to protect it with Pauper. So maybe Wizard will ban these in the near future in Legacy. We will see. Okay, I think we talked about everything. I think I will also upload on my YouTube tomorrow the first part of the roleplays of my Pauper Super Qualifier with Azurus Familiar. I recorded it in Italian actually, so probably you will not much interested in watching it. I also played really poorly, so. And that's a reason why I'd like to upload it, because it can show you my errors. Maybe you can improve from it. So thank you for watching, and see you later for the next video.